Another episode of Craig Biddle Live. This week, I want to pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago, and I want to talk more about value hierarchies. Now, in the first episode where I discussed value hierarchies and the math of egoism, I gave mostly theory, and I was talking about the fact that you need to establish a value hierarchy, surrounding essentially your central purpose or your career in life and the other major values in your life, from recreational activities and pursuits to romantic relationships and to your various other aspects of your life that you think are of substantial importance. And I did mostly theory, and then I talked about the fact that once you have your hierarchy established, you want to use, in effect, the math of egoism. You want to say, in effect, any action that works to support and achieve my goals is a good action. And so in terms of the plateau and the slope, that's your plateau, that's your principle, your value hierarchy. And any action that is not working toward that is the wrong action to take, and that's sort of the math of egoism. And once you have your value hierarchy figured out, you can act fully and consistently and sort of scientifically, morally, by simply upholding your value hierarchy and pursuing your values without sacrifice as a matter of course, as a matter of principle. Today I want to talk about practice, and to do so I'm going to take you on a personal story of my own about my career as an intellectual and how it began and how I used value hierarchies and the math of egoism, which I was not calling it the math of egoism at the time. That's a relatively new term that I came up with. But and how I use value hierarchies is what I want to discuss to create the career that I have now from a seemingly bizarre place, as you'll see. So we're going to go back in my history a little bit, and I'm going to tell you how I discovered the whole concept of value hierarchies and how I used them to become the intellectual that I am today, and to be able to do the kinds of work that I do today. So we're going to go back to 1989. In 1989, I was a furniture maker. I had majored in furniture design at an art school in Richmond, Virginia, and had graduated and was working on my own full-time designing and building furniture. And I had stayed away from academia all my life, basically, even through high school and prior to that middle school, because I was just not interested in academia because I'm dyslexic. Reading is very difficult for me. It's extremely slow and fatiguing. So I just tried to stay away and just do the bare minimum that I could in terms of academia. And when I got to college, I went into art school, which I loved, and graduated from there and started a career as a furniture designer. In 1989, a few years into this career, I discovered, while delivering some books, a bookcase to a client, we were moving the books from the old case to the new, and I came across a book called The Fountainhead on the customer's shelf. And I looked at it because I had heard about it from my brother and some friends. And I was reading the back of it, and she said, "Oh, you've got to take that home and read it. If you haven't read that yet, you'll just absolutely love this book." And I was not going to read a 700-page novel. I wasn't a reader, and it takes too long for me to read those kinds of things. And it's fatiguing. It hurts, in effect, for somebody who's dyslexic to read a lot of material like that. But she was a customer, so I humored her. And I took the book home, and I don't know exactly what possessed me, but for some reason I cracked that book open that weekend, and I couldn't put it down. And this is the first time in my life that I got absolutely sucked into a book in a way that I just could not put the book down. And it took me almost 6 months to read The Fountainhead, to give you an idea of how slowly I read. And I was reading it pretty much every day. But I got through it, and the book completely changed my life, or the trajectory that reading this book put me on changed my life. I started plowing slowly, but plowing through all of Ayn Rand's works, and not only did I become utterly infatuated with her ideas, they were so practical and they were so clearly true, but I also became enamored with her ability to communicate. Her writing style was just unbelievably clear, and this is part of what pulled me into it and made it so interesting to me. And so I continued my furniture business for a few years while I just tried to get my head as well around objectivism and Ayn Rand's ideas as I could. And I soon, about 3 or 4 years into this, I realized, I love these ideas so much that I want to change my career. I want to understand and convey these ideas, objectivism and rational philosophy in general, for a living. So I wanted to change careers. Now, how does a dyslexic furniture maker, become a writer and a speaker and an intellectual in philosophy? This doesn't seem very, very plausible. But I was set. My mind was set on this. I was going to do it, and I wasn't asking, "Can I do it?" I was saying, "How am I going to do this?" So the first thing I realized is I need time. I need time to study and to write and to learn how to write, and to learn these ideas better and better and deeper and deeper. So I decided to move away from furniture making and go into sales. And I tried several different sales jobs, and none of them were enough to my liking to want to stick with anything in that direction very long. But I was also an avid rock climber at the time, and rock climbing gyms were popping up all over the country, and they were doing pretty well. So I thought, hey, I'll write a business plan for a rock climbing gym while I'm working these sales jobs during the day, and I'll try to start a gym and make some money that way, doing something I love, and then I'll find time to start working to learn to write and become an intellectual spreading these ideas. So I've already got this central purpose in mind. I want to become an intellectual, a writer, a speaker, conveying these ideas and trying ever more to deeply understand them and to concretize them for other people. This is my central purpose and the top value in my value hierarchy. During these years, I was pretty much asocial. I'm not very social to begin with, but my social life was pretty much zero. I was working to the extent that I needed to make money, and I was studying these ideas and trying to figure out how to write. And I hadn't written anything through high school and college to speak of, so this was all very new to me. And I finished the business plan. I spent about a year writing a very comprehensive business plan, did a lot of research, demographics of the area, the whole 9 yards. And I was meeting with potential investors to look over this business plan, and I was sending it out to various people. And I sent a copy to a very successful real estate developer in Richmond who had recently liquidated a bunch of his assets, and I knew that from the news. And he called me after I sent him a copy of the plan. He said he wanted to meet for lunch. So we go to lunch, and I sit down with him, and he says, "I don't want to invest in your climbing gym." He says, "This business plan is just beautifully written. It's got such incredibly precise detail, and it's extremely convincing, and it looks like this would be a really good gym, but I'm not interested in investing in a climbing gym. I want you to come work for me and write some other business plans for me." And I laughed, and I said, "I don't want to write business plans. I want to open a climbing gym." And we got started talking about my goals and his goals and the different things. And to make a very long story short there, he finally said, "Well, if you want to open a climbing gym, I mean, this is more of a hobby than a career." He said, "If that's your career goal, what are your hobbies?" At that point, I told him philosophy. And I started telling him about the ideas of Ayn Rand, which he became extremely interested in. He likes to joke that when I first said that my hobby is philosophy, he said, "Philosophy, who needs it?" Which I don't think he actually said, but that's the way he tells the story today. Anyway, to speed this up, so he gets interested in these ideas, and he keeps telling me he wants me to come work for him, and I keep telling him no. And he finally says, "Look, how about we just cut to the chase here, and you come work for me, write 2 business plans for me, and I will pay you to write your book." Now, when you hear something that sounds too good to be true, you need to be careful, of course. But I had gotten pretty close to this guy by this point, and he was pretty serious about this. So I said, "Look, you read Atlas Shrugged. If you get to the end of that book and you can look me square in the eyes and say, 'Look, you're welcome to write your book based on these ideas, and you'll do it however you want, and I'll just pay you to write it until it's done.' And I said, 'If you're willing to do that, we'll shake on it, and I will sell the business plan to some friends and come work for you for a while, and then you'll pay me to write the book. And sure enough, he read Atlas and agreed to that, and that is how I became a paid intellectual. Now, where am I at this point? So I'm being paid to write a book, but I don't know how to write. Now, I was very frank with this guy the entire time. I said, look, I'm just getting into this. I don't know much about writing. I am still learning about this philosophy. So I have a lot of work to do. And when, if I come on board with you this way, most of what I'm going to be doing is studying and trying to figure out how to convey these ideas really clearly. But he was already impressed with the way that I was able to make the ideas of objectivism and rational philosophy in general concrete and usable in the real world. So he was willing to take this risk, and I was certainly willing to do it if he was willing to work with me on this. So I hunkered down in an office in Richmond, Virginia, and I started working on my first book, which was then not titled Loving Life. It was called Of Love and Logic. And about 2.5 years, 3 years later, I finished a draft of that, and I brought it in and set it down on my friend's desk, and I said, here's the draft of the book, and I said, it's awful. And he said, what do you mean it's awful? And I said, it's awful. I said, I'm done, but reading through it, I now realize that this is not what it really needs to be. I tried to do too much in one book. I tried to cover too much. Some of it's floating because of that. It's not sufficiently concretized. And I started telling him the problems with it. I wanted to be completely frank, and he had seen some of the chapters earlier, but he was not in a position necessarily at the time to evaluate them really closely and come to his own conclusions about to whether this is something to keep going. So he looked me square in the eyes and he said, well, do you know what you need to do to fix it? And I said, yes. And he said, well, go do that. And so we shook hands, and I embarked on draft 2 of this book. So here I am being paid to write, and I'm staying 100% focused every day. I'm doing nothing but working on this book. I'm working simultaneously to understand the ideas and to learn how to write about the ideas and to learn about how to write in general. So I'm reading all sorts of books on writing. I'm scouring all the best writing that I can find. Anything I read, I'm looking for why is this good or why is this bad? What's the principle behind this? I put 100% of my focus into trying to learn how to convey ideas clearly. And about 1.5 years or 2 years later, I walked in and I set down another draft, and I said, here it is, and I think it's reasonably good. And so we went through it together and we talked about it, and I was sharing material with my friends at the time, trying to get feedback from intelligent people that I knew. And we agreed that it was pretty good, so it was time to start the heavy editing. And I spent about another year editing, and that ultimately was published under the title Loving Life, the Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts that Support It. So I wrote that book under those conditions, and the only way that those conditions came to be is because I set in my mind the goal that I wanted to become an intellectual writer and speaker. Well, speaker was down the line still, but I wanted to become someone who understood these ideas well enough to convey them clearly and to communicate them to other people in a way that they could start to wrap their head around them. And I started with the idea that I was going to do that, and I started looking for angles or avenues to accomplish that goal. When I was working on sales to try to figure out how to pay for the time that was necessary to learn how to think about these ideas and write, that was my avenue there. When another opportunity opened up, I took that avenue because the goal remained the same. My hierarchy of values, this top value that I wanted to achieve, was ever present in front of me. It was the thing I wanted to do, and I was going to take any avenue that would get me closer to that goal. So I get this book published, and suddenly I am available not only to write more material, but also to speak. Once you write a book, and it's a relatively good book on a subject, you become a possible speaker at various conferences and the like. So sure enough, within a couple of years, I was speaking at conferences on this topic and related topics. I was working on another book, And lo and behold, I was all of a sudden a paid professional intellectual writer and speaker. Now, from there, as I mentioned, I was working on another book, and then the opportunity came to start The Objective Standard. And the same gentleman who had funded my writing of Loving Life was impressed enough with the work that I had been doing since publishing Loving Life that he said, look, I'd be happy to give the seed money to start a journal of culture and politics based on these ideas as well. So we started the journal, and that pulled me. Now, when we started TOS, I thought that the amount of work that was going to be on my part was going to be relatively small. I thought I would get lots of manuscripts would come in, and I would look through them and do some light editing here and there. And that's not the way editing works under any circumstances, and I just didn't know it at the time. There's a lot of work involved. You go iteration after iteration through pieces with most of the writers, and this is normal. We do it with my own writing as well. And so it's a lot more work. And TOS then became the centerpiece of my life, still under the umbrella of understanding and communicating vital philosophic ideas, in crystal clear layman's terms. That's sort of the way I think about what I try to do. And so it's still under that umbrella, but it was something that, 3 years prior to that, the start of that, which was in 2005, 3 years prior to the start of that, I had no idea that would be something that I would be doing. It's still under the umbrella of the central purpose that I had embarked upon, and that is still my central purpose today. So what I think is valuable in this story is the fact that here I came from being a furniture maker, a dyslexic furniture maker who had no experience in writing and no knowledge of philosophy to begin with, to choosing a goal, putting it in front of me and saying, this is the central value, this is the top value I'm going after, and everything else in life is going to be subservient to this. And it was. All of my social life was subservient. My romantic interests were subservient to that. My recreational activities were. Everything was. And by setting my mind to that and using that, keeping that in front of me all the time, I was able to do something that really was unlikely for somebody like me to do. Friends of mine and I joke that I'm the improbable editor because I'm a dyslexic guy who edits a philosophical journal. Doesn't make any sense. So I think there's some value in this. And the one thing I want to leave you with is this. There's a difference between your actual hierarchy of values and your desired hierarchy of values. Sometimes there might not be a difference, but there can be a difference. And what you want to do is you want to bring these together. And the way that you can do that is you can either look back at the last 6 or 8 weeks of your life or start today and log the next 6 or 8 weeks of your life and find out how it is you're spending your time. Because the way that you're spending your time is basically your de facto hierarchy of values. If you're putting a lot of time into watching television and very little time into doing things that are going to advance the kind of life that you really want to live, the kind of life that you want to build for yourself, then you're valuing that lesser life more than the greater life. And what you want to do is you want to pay attention to exactly what you're doing with your time and then create a value hierarchy that you want. What kind of career do you want? Or where do you want to go with the career that you already have? What kind of people do you want to spend your time with? What kind of romantic partner are you interested in? How do you want to spend your free time, your recreational time? Take these things really seriously and put in front of yourself the top value, the one that matters the most. And this is typically going to be your central purpose because it's the thing that makes possible all of the other values, really. Put that in front of yourself and then say, whatever it takes, I'm going to put my time and effort toward that until I get it done. Now, there's no real done as in the end of the road, but until I have achieved some degree of success in that, and then you keep going with it. Today, my central purpose remains to understand, vital philosophic ideas and communicate them in clear layman's terms to the extent that I can. And I continue to do that. I have no idea where I'll be in the next 4 years. I'm going to continue working with TOS. I'm going to going to continue writing some of the books I'm working on. I'm going to be doing some more speaking, and I'm not sure where things are going to go. But if you put your most important values in front of yourself and you focus on them come hell or high water and pursue them come hell or high water, avenues open up, doors open up, and you can achieve incredible things that you probably thought you couldn't achieve before getting there, or that you had maybe even had good reason to think you might not be able to achieve. So I hope this is helpful. Once you think in these terms, again, I always want to bring it back to this issue of the principled way of thinking about things. You've got a plateau and you've got a slope. And the relationship of those things relative to your value hierarchy is that once you know what it is you want, everything you do in life should be supportive of that in some way or other. And if it's not, then it's over on the slope. It's where you don't want to be. The way you spend your free time should be supportive of your central purpose. The kind of people you spend your time with should be supportive of the kind of person you want to be to achieve your central purpose, and so on. So there's powerful, powerful material in these ideas if you put them into action. And the most important thing about value hierarchies is A, setting them, and B, acting on them. You have to use these things. If you do, you're going to soar. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join me next week for another episode of Craig Biddle Live. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about then. If you have any suggestions, drop them in the comment section below or email me at cbiddle@theobjectivestandard.com. Till next week, love your life.